Hey everybody, welcome. I'm so glad that you could join us today. My name is Lisa Ann and you are listening to Message Delivery. You can't make this stuff up. If you are interested in getting a reading from me, you can reach me at angelmessages2u.com. That's angelmessages, the number 2, the letter u.com. But as we do at the beginning of every show, we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull an oracle card and just take a quick look. And again, whenever you hear this is when you are meant to get the message. So the card that we have is the card of perseverance. So basically this card states that you should just be aware that there's more than one way to do something. And even though there might be no other conceivable way to do something, they're asking you to persevere and actually take a step back and maybe reanalyze what your goal and task is, and maybe be open to other suggestions. So basically, take a breather, take a moment to look at what it is that you could be doing a little bit differently to get to the same result. So, but on that note, I would like to welcome Philip Young of Black Unicorn Tarot and Astrology. And he is my astrology guru. And I just would like to say welcome. Welcome, Philip. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. So I just want to let everybody know at about the 45-minute mark, I will be giving you a phone number for a contest winner for a 1-hour birth chart and current energy astrology report with Philip. And if you are the first caller in, I've got a gift certificate already set and I will be sending that off to you. So good luck to those people that try. Anyway, so Philip, just basically tell me a little bit about you. What intrigued you to get involved in astrology in the first place? And I got to give you kudos because I really don't know that many guys that would actually take the time to learn and master it like you have done. So what got you interested in this?
Well, I certainly got started very young. I found my interest in astrology when I was 18, 19. And part of it is I just love narratives. I love how stories are told. And astrology is a rich narrative of information, and it's based on something to do with the layout of the solar system and how that connects with human personality. And actually, my first foray into astrology turned out to be a little bit disappointing. I purchased, or was looking to purchase, Linda Goodman's sun signs, and I was reading about Aries, which is my sun sign, and it was nothing like who I was. And I thought, well, this isn't actually very useful. So I ended up buying a deck of tarot cards, and that's when I got started in tarot cards. This was in 1989. But a little later on, a New Age bookstore opened up in Greensboro that had some more advanced astrology books. And once I was able to take a look at some advanced astrology books and understand that, yes, I have an Aries sun sign, but I also have something called my North Node that's in Aries as well, and it's right next to my sun. So I'm learning to be an Aries in this lifetime. So I'm actually supposed to take on the traits of Aries, but I don't actually behave that way naturally. I'm trying to figure it out. And once I had that information, I was like, well, now this is a little bit more useful. This makes a lot more sense. And then when I had gone back and read about Libra and Scorpio, Libra is where my moon is, and Scorpio is my ascendant, those resonated with me because those were more obvious and easy to spot. So once I had a chance to get into a little bit more complex astrology besides sun sign astrology, then I got really hooked and I started studying it seriously after that.
Very interesting. Okay, you said all sorts of buzzwords. So to everybody that's listening, I'm going to try to break this down and make it as easy as possible because there is so much information that he has that it's mind-blowing. I've been to a couple of his classes. It's amazing. You are just completely in awe of what he can tell you about your life just by getting one of your charts done with him. So being an expert on your own personal birth chart, has your life been easier to understand now that you feel that you have better mastered knowing what you know?
Oh, well, absolutely. And the thing that's also challenging about knowing your astrology or knowing astrology is that it is kind of like following weather. And some days there are storms and some days there's sunshine. You don't get to avoid the storms just because you know your chart. You just have a chance to prepare. And you also know the length of the storms a lot of times, but you also have moments where energy's flowing and it's easy and you can get a lot of things accomplished. So, in terms of being able to have a better life, absolutely knowing your astrology will help. It will help you with relationships. If you're a parent, it will help you with parent child dynamics. If you're looking to start a business, astrology has a tool for helping you determine when's the best time to start a business. There's an aspect of astrology called astrocartography when you look at locations. Where's a good place to live? Where's a good place to go to school? Where should you vacation? All kinds of uses that are invaluable. But definitely it helps you to just, first of all, get a lot of confirmation about who you are. I mean, one of the things that I do when I do a chart for someone is I make notes on their charts before I actually meet with them, and I send those notes to them before we have our session. So I have quite a bit of information that I write down, never having met the person or spoken to them yet. And people are always a little bit stunned at the information that shows up. And sometimes I'll even come across something in the chart that I'm working on that I'm going to say, I can't believe I'm getting ready to say this to this person, but it's in the chart. So I need to go ahead and let them know this is what I see in your chart. And
So
inevitably
basically, you
they'll
can
go,
blame it
yeah,
on the
that's
stars.
right. So, but the thing is the chart itself is a two-dimensional representation of the layout of the solar system when you took your first breath. So it's your own personal map, and it gives us as astrologers information to talk to you about yourself. But knowing your chart absolutely has made life a lot easier in a way that I understand why things are what they are. I understand why the difficulties occur the way they do, how long they last. All of those things are absolutely very helpful.
You covered so much. And yes, we're going to get to one key point that you said, because that was just mind blowing to me when I took one of your classes, but we'll get back to that one section a little bit later. So, okay, so let's talk about general astrology. And this is going beyond the zodiac signs. And although we're going to get to that in a next set of questions, there are 12 houses that are in there. What are those houses and what do they represent?
Sure. So the houses are segments that represent areas of your life. So the first house is your quest for identity. The second house is your quest for resources and safety and security. Your third house is communication, how you understand the world, how you communicate with people, the environment around you, how you interact with it. Your fourth house is about your family. The fifth house deals with your first independence or your creativity, how you sort of define yourself in the world that's separate from your family. Sixth house is service and health. There is a huge segment of astrology called medical astrology. The sixth house is what most astrologers will look at to talk to you if you have concerns about health. Seventh house is partnerships of people out in the world that help you succeed in the world. So these can be an employer, it can be a coworker, it could be someone that's a teacher. It also is the house of marriage, but because of the marriage contract, the legal part of it, not the love part of it. Okay. And then the eighth house is your house of intimacy. So what I say to people about the eighth house is that's the house you get naked with somebody in. And it's a transformative house. Right. The ninth house deals with mastership, what you're trying to come to be an expert at. And then the 10th house is prosperity. This is what you're going to do that will actually gain you enough wealth in life to have your own family. So the 10th house opposes the fourth house of family. The 11th house is community, and the 12th house is your spirituality.
Wow. Okay. So we cover all the bases. And I like how you said like the marriage or the love part is about the contract, not about the intimacy. That's covered in a different wheelhouse. So that right. Makes complete and perfect sense. So out of the planets, what are the heaviest hitters in astrology? Like, do all of the planets that are going to be in the different houses, do they all carry the same energy?
Well, in terms of just sheer energy, the sun and the moon are the strongest. The sun being the largest body in the solar system and the moon being the closest satellite to the earth. And the sun represents our life path and the moon represents our soul path. So if we're not looking at a chart as a conglomerate of a design, just standalone, the sun and the moon are the most powerful. But after that, it really is a requirement of looking at an individual chart. So as an example, my daughter happens to have 2 points, Pluto and Mars, merged together, very close together in her chart. So those are going to be dynamically important for her, whereas somebody else might have those 2 points in not nearly as active a position. Other points might be more valuable. But if you're talking about just grading them, it's basically the sun, the moon, then everything that's within the solar system that we think of as planets, but there's also an asteroid belt that we're now using more asteroids in astrology, and those would be a sort of a third tier down. So you've got the sun, the moon, planets, and then asteroids.
Wow. Okay, I had no idea that asteroids were actually included in this grouping. That's like, okay, I didn't even know that. So, all right. So, and I hope I don't overlap too many of these questions because I tried to break them down into subject matters so that we're all on the same page. The different planets, like when I hear like Venus, I know that Venus represents love. What's the catchphrases for the different planets? Like the sun would represent what? The moon would represent what? Like there's a buzzword or an alternate name that it would reflect a subject matter. What would those be?
Sure. So the sun would be I am. It is your core energy. It's as if you were standing naked. That is your sun is what you see, and it's you without any kind of clothing. The moon is I feel. So this is connected to your emotions. The Mercury, which is communication, is I communicate, I understand. Mars, which is I desire, and then Venus is I relate. And then you have Jupiter, which is I expand or I experience. Saturn is I structure, I limit. And then you have Uranus, which is I break through, I do something revolutionary, I revolutionize. And then Neptune is I spiritualize. And then Pluto is I transform.
So basically you could take all of those key statements and then with the information that you're given based on what's in your specific chart, that answers the questions then, and that is a clear indication about who you are.
Right. So let's put all the pieces together and let's use Mars as an example.
Okay.
So I have Mars in the sign of Taurus in the seventh house. So my drive or my desire is to relate to people in a stable and persistent way. So just like you would say, what were the keywords for the planets, you would also want to have keywords for the signs. So Aries is independence. Taurus is security. Gemini is communication. Cancer is nurturing. Leo is performance. Virgo is service. Libra is harmony or balance. Scorpio is transformation. I transform, it transforms things. Sagittarius is authority. Capricorn is responsibility. Aquarius is community. And Pisces is spirituality. So when you take a point and you put it in a sign and you put it in a house, you have to be able to translate all three of those pieces in order to say something useful about someone's chart.
Huh. Okay, well, that's kind of cool. So I know that this is kind of diving off the deep end, but I had a question about when you're looking at a chart, it'll say, something is 18 degrees in another chart. Do those numbers mean something like if you're closer to 100, it's closer to another sign? And is all of these degrees based on the equator? I mean, how are those calculated?
So the chart is, of course, 360 degrees, and it's broken down into the 12 segments. Now, the house systems add a level of complexity because there's not just one house system. But for the sake of simplicity, I'll describe whole signs, which is 30 degrees per house. So there's 30 degrees in each sign, and what will happen is that a point will be at a particular degree, and yes, those degrees do matter. If a point is in the early degrees, let's say the first 10 degrees, then that energy is developing into that sign's sort of focus. If you are in the 10 to 20 degree range with a point, that sign is fully realized. And then if it's in the last 10 degrees, it's leaving behind and heading towards the next sign, energetically speaking. So yes, we would take into account the degree placement. So again, let's use my Mars as an example. My Mars is at 11 degrees of Taurus. So the attitude about relationships, which is that I want to be secure, I want to be loyal, I want to have long-term relationships with people, that would be very solid in my design because it's right in the middle of the sign.
Oh, okay. All right. And another key buzzword that I heard is when it says that your sign is ruled by a planet.
Right.
And I know for me, I heard from my own side that I am ruled by Jupiter. What does that mean? Like, what does a ruling sign mean for your zodiac sign?
So the idea is that each point has, and there's an older term for the houses, which is domicile, and it's the same meaning, but there is a point that resides in each domicile as its owner, its ruler. So Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and it also rules the ninth house. And before the discovery of the three outer planets, Jupiter also ruled Pisces. And so rulership just means that whenever that point is in that particular sign or the house that it normally rules, it's amplified, it gets stronger. And then there are certain placements where if the point is in a sign, it could be in a difficulty. So for example, Jupiter in Capricorn struggles, but Jupiter in Sagittarius is glorious. So the placement will be what that rulership is and how that plays out. So for example, if you have a sun of Sagittarius, that means that one of the things your sun wants to do is look to where Jupiter is in your chart. Now, Jupiter may not be in Sagittarius in your chart, but wherever it is, the sun is looking there to understand how you want to expand yourself, how you want to adventure in life, like doing a radio show and connecting with people worldwide. That's a very Saturnian type of behavior.
Makes complete sense then. I get that. Okay, so one more buzzword, and then I'm going to get on to some different subjects. Retrograde. Right now,
Yes.
we are in retrograde. Is it a bad word? Is it a good word? What should we expect when we hear that word retrograde?
Okay, so I'm going to give you my brilliant explanation of retrograde that I finally came up with. It makes me actually very happy. First of all, Mercury retrograde is the one that most people are familiar with. It happens 3 times a year. It's a natural process. Here's the explanation. Imagine that direct is going down the highway at 65 miles per hour. Retrograde is when you come to the city limits and the speed limit drops from 65 to 35. Why Mercury retrograde or retrograde is a problem is people want to drive 65 through the 35 zone. If
Yeah.
they drop down to 35 miles per hour, they can sign contracts, they can travel anywhere in the world they want to, they can make whatever decisions they want, and they'll be fine. They just have to obey the speed limit. The problem is people don't want to obey the speed limit, and then they equate that as retrograde being bad, when in fact retrograde is about relaxing, reviewing, taking time to consider things, going things over without doing it in a rush. So retrograde energy is actually meant to be beneficial because it gives us a break from trying to go forward all the time. And so I always try to encourage people that retrograde is not a negative thing, but if you're having a negative experience from it, it's probably because you're not obeying the speed limit.
Okay, now see, that makes complete sense. Like everybody is like, oh, I mean, it's like, well, I did this and it wasn't so great. You know why? Mercury's in retrograde. So I also heard Saturn being in retrograde. Is there one planet that if it goes in retrograde, you really need to watch out, or does it apply to all the planets?
Well, each one of them will require you to observe what it is that that planet needs you to know in that phase. Believe it or not, Saturn retrograde is more reinforcing of Saturn's behavior because Saturn's naturally a limiter by design. But Jupiter retrograde is a bit more of a challenge because Jupiter doesn't want to hold itself back. Neither does Mars. And Mars is currently retrograde right now, which is very difficult because what it causes for us is a desire to want to get things done, but run into a frustration of being able to get them done, which means we need to have a lot of patience during a Mars retrograde. We just won't feel it, right? It's like standing in the line and realizing that you need to get to your next appointment and the line's moving slowly. That'll feel like a Mars retrograde moment. It's like I need this to be done and I need it to be done now, but I can't get through it. That's when you have to take a breath and you may have to text your appointment and say, I'm going to be a little bit late, and relax into it.
Okay, so it's possible then that one or more can be in retrograde at the same time, and you could actually get the trifecta of all of them, and you just need to be conscious of them and
Right. So
slow down and be aware.
exactly. So for right now, Mars is retrograde, Uranus is retrograde, Neptune is retrograde. Now,
Ooh.
3 weeks ago, Pluto was retrograde, Saturn was retrograde, and Jupiter was retrograde along with those three. So we are coming to a shift where the retrograde energy is not as dominant as it was 3 weeks ago. but there's still a lot of energy that is retrograde. And knowing where it is, and then knowing where it is in relation to your chart is important. So, for example, I know that Uranus is moving through the segment of my chart where my Mars is in my seventh house, which means that the relationships that I have with people are probably going to suffer some sort of need for me to just take my time and connecting with people, or I may have missed opportunities. And I just need to recognize that that's part of the flow of things right now. So I know the duration of that. I know where it's affecting my own chart. That's also the thing is you don't want to just know if a planet's retrograde. You do want to know your chart so you know where it's affecting you specifically.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so now we're going to skip over to the zodiac signs. We all look in the newspaper, we go, okay, I am this particular zodiac sign. How accurate, in your opinion, is someone's zodiac sign that is prescribed to their personality? Would you say that it's really accurate, or it really is an accumulation of the other things that you mentioned, where the moon and the sun, etc.?
Right. So it's going to be, it could be generally useful, but it also will depend on the individual chart. So, as an example, when I read my Aries horoscope or I read about Aries as a sun sign, it doesn't speak to me because it's not because of the other factors in my chart. So, asking someone, like, let's say for myself, they'll say, well, I'm a Taurus. What can you tell me about Taurus? I can tell you a lot of things about Taurus, but I can't tell you much about you. If you want me to tell you about what it means for you to be Taurus, I need to see your chart, because Taurus as your sun sign could be very dominant, or it could be actually dealing with a lot of challenges from the rest of the chart. But if I just start talking about Taurus, you might go, well, that's just crap. That doesn't apply to me at all. Well, that's because I'm not looking at your whole chart. So the example I'll give is, imagine that you're looking at an iceberg and you're seeing the tip of it above the water.
Right.
That's sun sign astrology. The actual iceberg that's below that, that's your full chart.
Oh, okay. Well, that's kind of a good way to kind of explain it. So you really can just get a tip of the iceberg, so to speak, glimpse of what it is. But to know the person maybe on a more in-depth level, you need to kind of know what's below. So that makes sense. So what does it mean when somebody is on the cusp of two signs? Like, I know that I am closer into Sagittarius, but I also am really just over the cusp to a Scorpio. So do I tend to, in that case, for somebody that's closer to one sign than the other and not smack in the middle, is that a fair statement to say that they can saddle both personality traits?
Well, what they'll get is they'll get some sort of bleed from the other sign, but whatever sign they're actually in will still be the leading sign. But let's use your Scorpio Sagittarius as an example, right? So you've got to be at the end of Scorpio, at the beginning of Sagittarius, but you're in Sagittarius. So that means you're still feeling the effects of Scorpio, the transformative energy of Scorpio.
Right.
So as a Sagittarius with a close affinity to Scorpio, you may be a little more secretive than most Sagittarians, or you may be a little more reserved about certain things, or you may have a lot more proclivities towards unusual interest in sexuality or intense interactions with other people than a Sagittarius that's further into the sign or actually closer to Capricorn.
Okay, now that makes a lot of sense. I will let everybody know a lot of those apply. I'm going to let you guess which ones. But no, seriously, I was like, that's like below the iceberg of the water.
Right.
I get that. So okay, so another thing is, if you like, one of the things that you had said, which, and I know you mentioned this at the beginning, when you did a chart for us in the class, you actually showed to stay away from certain states, like you would have a bigger struggle. And I know this is kind of off the cuff, but what does that, if you know this, you need to go get a chart read by him, because that was baffling to see that if you actually were in, he was actually showing lines. Can you explain that?
Sure. So the work is called astrocartography, and what the astrologer that developed it figured out was that wherever your chart was cast, you can apply it to a map, and your lines emanate from your birth origin and go out in the direction of the layout of your chart. And those lines run all the way around the globe. They reconnect at another point on the other side and then continue back around to your birth location. And so some of those lines, if you're living near them, you'll get whatever that energy is. And sometimes it can be beneficial and sometimes it can be challenging. So, for example, let's take two different points, Jupiter and Saturn. And someone says, well, I'd like to know where I can go and really have a great vacation. Well, let's see where your Jupiter line is running. Wherever that is, you're probably going to have a really good time. But let's say you're considering a school to go to and you really want to do academics. Well, I wouldn't want to put you in a school on a Jupiter line because it's going to be a party line and not a line for you to really get your academics done. I would want to put you on a Saturn line if you're doing your work for your college. So let's imagine that we were going to be really advanced in astrology in our society, and every kid that was going to apply to college was going to talk to an astrologer, and they were going to give an astrologer their list of universities. As an astrologer, I would be trying to match you up with a Saturn line somewhere in the country with one of the universities you selected, because you're going to do a lot better job with your academics on a Saturn line than you will on a Jupiter line.
Okay. So, I will tell you guys, I was completely fascinated. And when it actually auto-populated the numbers for my particular birth chart, I was like so happy because it was like, stay away from the lines, people, stay away from the lines. And everybody in the class was so happy that we weren't on the lines, but it made sense that you could actually give yourself a few more challenges because of that information. So totally fascinating. What planets need to be paid attention to that are often overlooked, in your opinion?
I think, in many ways, once you sort of find your chart and you want to look at your chart, you'll notice that some points or planets really do come out with a lot of emphasis, and other ones are not as emphasized. And then you have to probably, if you want to attend to that, you're going to have to give it more energy. Or you may discover that being in a relationship with someone triggers something that you don't have a lot of energy for. So if, let's say, Venus is very strong in your chart, relating to other people may be something you do a lot of, you're very good at it, you spend a lot of time focusing on it. But if Mars is in a difficult position or not being well supported, you may struggle with your drives, you may struggle getting things done. But then if someone comes into your life and their chart, let's say their sun or their moon activates that Mars in your chart, suddenly when you're around them, they can actually get you galvanized to do things. So it's really complicated. It's just not simple, straightforward, it's this or that. In terms of what people, when they sort of go beyond the sun sign and go beyond the moon sign, there's really a lot of interest in Mars and Venus because those are signs associated with sex and relating. And then if people are wanting to know about their career, they'll start looking at something like Jupiter and Saturn. So a lot of times it depends on what people's interests are as to what they're focused on and what they're ignoring. But in general, I would say there's no particular sign that's being ignored more than another, nor do I think there's any particular point or sign that's being focused on more than another.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so to a novice, somebody that's just getting started, is there a way that you would say, okay, look, just look at what the general things are? Or is it really just, if you really want to truly understand, you need to do a complete and comprehensive? And I will tell you that when you actually auto-populated every single thing that could be put on a chart, it was unbelievable. Like there were so many markings. And so, I mean, when somebody is a novice and just getting started, how many aspects of their chart is it before it gets to be overload?
Well, one of the difficulties of most beginning books is they are not honest. And so what I mean by that is that to be able to use astrology and really get an effective value out of it, you're going to have to put a lot of time in. And by a lot of time, I mean PhD level time. So there is no shortcut. The astrology made easy, the only astrology book you'll ever need, all of that is to sell books, but it isn't really going to give you a good understanding of getting to the point where you can really value the chart and get the energy out of it or the knowledge out of it you want. So when I wrote my book, and plugging my book for just a moment, I was addressing this concern. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to show people how to break it down to get into it, but I also wanted to understand the level of complexity that's involved so that by the time you finish reading my book, either you are, oh my goodness, I understand and I'm ready to commit and I want to become an astrology scholar so I can really use it properly, or you go, now I understand why Philip charges what he charges and I'm happy to pay his prices.
That
I
makes
will simply
complete
give him a
sense.
call and get a reading from him.
Absolutely. So what is the name of your book, by the way?
My book's name is Astrology Unlocked. It is available on Amazon. And I'll tell you a funny Amazon story just because it's one of those irritating things. It doesn't have a high star rating because one individual gave it a low rating because they couldn't download the digital copy. And when I called Amazon to say, this person hasn't even read the book, they're just complaining about they couldn't download it. I would like you to remove this, this review. They wouldn't do it.
Huh,
So a fascinating thing just to get my little aggravation out.
no
But what the
problem.
book, but what the book is really about is it's designed to be a beginner's book with the intention that it's got a very short introduction, 60 pages, and I really just try to give people an understanding that what you want to get from is what we talked about earlier. When you get a beginner book, you're going to get a section that says, my sun is in Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and it'll say something about that. Then you'll flip to chapter 2, and it will say, your sun is in the first house, second house, third house. Then it'll say something about that. What it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you what it means for your sun to be in Taurus in the third house. That's what I do in my book. That's the level of getting to the next tier that you need to have in order to really understand what you're interpreting. Because if you just know your sun in Aries and you just know your sun in Taurus and you can't put those two pieces together, you're really missing out on the true fundamental basis of what your chart's going to be about.
Gotcha. Okay. So knowing that these different planets are in different parts of our chart and we're all completely different, um, is there a way to get around? Like if you see that there are difficulties in or challenges in a certain, I know that you could use it as a heads up. Is there a way to get away and say, you know what, we're just going to skip that one? Is there a way to get around it? Or is it just, nope, you're just doomed. It's the way it's going to happen. Just look for it.
Well, it's that part of astrology does have a determining kind of factor to it, and it depends on how you want to address it. So, for example, one of the things that we all have in our charts is the South Node. The South Node represents our karmic lesson. It's something that we fall into very easily, and it's sort of an energetic trap, if you will. And so, in my example, mine is in Libra. So, I like to ride in as a white knight and save people. That's been one of my things. The problem is, it gets me into trouble. But the fact is that I automatically react that way when people need help. I'm ready to jump in, and I need to dial that back and wait and see if the people can figure it out for themselves. If they need me to, I need to be invited rather than jumping in. But I will always have the reaction as the same. So there are things in our chart that may be problematic for us. Once we know that, we can work with it, but we never eliminate it. We never make it not to be true.
Okay, that's not fun, but at least it's kind of like, well, if you know you're gonna, it's like those old commercials. If you knew you were gonna have a car accident, you'd put your seatbelt on. So knowing some of this at least kind of gives you a heads up, I'm assuming. So now let's jump into relationships and astrology. I realize that anything is possible with the right amount of effort, but at least what I've seen online, etc., it's like there are better matches for somebody in a zodiac accompaniment than a different sign.
Sure.
What is your opinion on that? Because I realize that, based on what you just said, we're all talking about the tip of the iceberg, but it's all this stuff that's under the water that we don't know. So, if it says, fire signs, I'm a fire sign, you're a fire sign, and then there's Libra and Aquarius or whatever, those would be better matches than, somebody that is a Virgo or such. But is there truth to that? Or is it really, you've got to look what's under the, what's the below the water, so to speak?
Sure. Well, first of all, if you're going to be talking about relationship astrology, you really need to know where your moon is. The sun sign is not a good indicator for relationship connection because the moon is who you are inside. It's how you give and receive love. And most of the time when people are asking about relationship, they're wanting to know how their moons interact with another person's moon. And yes, if you have signs that are of the same element, like we're both fire signs, we're both fire sun signs, what that means is that probably in a situation where we meet each other, we'll just be naturally gregarious to one another. We'll easily communicate because we both have a fire resonance. It's like we'll recognize one of our own tribe in that
Right.
way. But as we get to know each other, we may discover that on an emotional level, we could have a very different connection because maybe you have a moon in a water sign and I have a moon that's in an air sign. Those signs are not complementary. They're going to have to work with each other. Now, once again, if you have a strong attraction to someone, you don't mind maybe doing that work, but it will always be work. If you've got signs that are not complementary or not congruent, congruent meaning that fire to fire, earth to earth, water to water, complementary would be earth to water, fire to air. So those complement. Any other combination is going to be and require effort to make it function because they just won't jive. They won't flow as easily. Now, for some people, that may be okay because they want the challenge or they enjoy it, but it will always be easier for fire signs to recognize other fire signs. And if you're talking about, let's say, doing something competitively or doing something for fun, that similarity will carry the day in most cases, much further than some sort of difference or dissonance that you can get from elements being different or signs clashing.
Okay. So then what would you say the relevance would be to an opposite zodiac sign? For example, like my youngest son is a Gemini. And I remember just bawling my eyes out. He was 2 years old. And I said, I don't get it. I'm not going to get along with this child. You know, what the heck is going on? And my husband at the moment said, he's exactly like you. And I'm like, no. And he goes, yeah, how do you like it now? You know, so he was giving back to me because he was my polar opposite, but we still had so many similar qualities. So being polar opposite, you know, it's opposites attract. Is there some relevance in that?
Well, interestingly enough, it's not so much the opposites attract because keep in mind that your son's element is complementary to your element. You're a fire sign and he's an air sign. So the opposition is about balance. So what the opposite signs are trying to do is they're trying to find a balance with each other. So imagine a seesaw, okay? And when you first encounter each other as oppositions, it's like the seesaw is going up and down. But what you're really trying to get to from each other is where you're both sitting on the seesaw and you're balanced on the seesaw.
Right.
So the thing that your son is trying to learn from you is how to take all of his knowledge and focus it into an expertise. And what he's trying to teach you is that no matter how much you think you know, you can always learn something new.
I don't think I want to admit that as a parent. He's way old enough now. We're over that hump. But
Right.
when he was little, that was that, you know, and I love him to death and I feel so close to him now. But, you know, there was some, you know, it was like oil and water sometimes, and other times we were a perfect match. So, you know, that was the challenge when he was growing up. So, talking about children, how do the planetary alignments affect children? Like I have a friend and I know we've all talked about it, you know, law enforcement, healthcare professionals know that when there is a full moon, does that tend to significantly affect children? Like, do we just excuse that, wow, it's a full moon, my son or daughter's acting up, we're just going to sweep that under the rug until it's over? Is there any correlation to children maybe in their behavior?
Oh, well, most definitely. And more likely, what it really is, I know it's easy to identify the full moon, but what would be great to know about your chart or your children's is what was the moon phase when they were born? Because whenever that phase comes around each month, that's when they're going to be activated more emotionally. So the idea is that if your child was, let's say, born during a new moon, each time the new moon comes around, that child is going to feel more the effects of the lunar transit than a child that it's just full moon. So the moon does have an effect, but you want to understand the child's chart. Also, you want to know where some of the faster moving bodies might be transiting. So if you're tracking Mars, let's say you've got a child that has a sun in Aries. Mars is moving through Aries right now. So the period of time that Mars is in Aries, that sun sign child of Aries is going to be much more aggressive because that Mars energy is activating their sun in an aggressive way. Whereas a child that maybe is more reserved while Mars is in Aries could come out of their shell a little bit more, but it would be degrees of difference based on knowing the child's chart. So yes, we can certainly look at astrology as a way of understanding the moods and transitions of our children and know that they're cyclical as well. So for example, the moon, of course, goes through all of the signs within 29 and a half days. And so we can track that as to where's the moon today. And then if you have your child's chart, you might understand what's going on for them emotionally. Venus, on the other hand, takes a couple of months to go through a sign. Mercury takes 3 weeks. So you can sort of start to get a rhythm of understanding where things are being triggered and why certain periods of time each year for your child might represent some sort of behavior that you can actually know when it's going to start and how long it's going to last and when it's going to end.
That makes sense. Okay, well, I'm sure she's listening and she's going to appreciate this. So 007, here's your answer. He said it. So we are going to take a real quick break. Philip, can you tell people if they want to have a chart read by you, how they can get a hold of you?
Sure. So my website is blackunicorn.com, and it's black, BLACK, but it's UNYKORN.com. So the unicorn is spelled with a Y and a K. So blackunicorn.com is my website. If you go there, you'll be able to click on a link for services and fees. It'll show you the services I have, what I charge. And then there's an appointment link that you can click on to fill out a form to contact me to set up an appointment.
Okay, perfect. And we're also going to announce for our contest, if you are the first caller at 1-800-930-2819, Philip is giving away a 1-hour birth chart and current energies astrological reading. And good luck to everybody, but we're going to take just a real quick break. We've got a few more questions to ask before we run out of time again. So we'll be right back. You've been listening to Message Delivery. You can't make this stuff up. I'm your host, Lisa Ann, and we'll be right back. Hey everybody, welcome back. You are listening to Message Delivery. You can't make this stuff up. I'm your host, Lisa Ann. And if you're interested in getting a reading with me, you can reach out to me at angelmessages2u.com. That's angelmessages, the number 2, the letter u.com. And today we are talking with Philip Young. He's an astrologer, and we were actually just talking during the commercial break, and he brought up a good point about parents, and if you know things about your relationship and things about your children, how one might be a better disciplinarian, etc. So Philip, can you fill us in on that again?
Sure. One of the things that's great about seeing family astrology, looking at everyone's chart, is you can see that certain dynamics in the charts will allow one parent to be able to be very successful dealing with a child in some specific way that the other parent may struggle with, and vice versa. And where it really comes up a lot of times is trying to handle maybe issues of discipline or issues of nurturing or whatever it might be. And sometimes it can be very clear that one parent, the child, and their energy is going to respond much better to questions of how the structure is going to work and the expectations of who's going to sort of set the boundaries for the child. And then another parent might be ideal for the child to really explore opening up, being vulnerable. They're more comfortable with that parent. And so it sort of breaks away from looking at just roles being about the mother being this and the father being that. It could be that the mother actually has the best design for the disciplining and the father has the much better design for the nurturing. All of that can play out in looking at the charts and seeing also where there might be gaps and the parents may need help from a friend or a grandparent. One of the things that I have for my daughter is I have a number of people in her life that I have available to talk with her about things that she probably wouldn't want to talk with me about, but I also have complete trust that they'll be able to give her good guidance because I know their charts and her chart and where those boundaries and where those lines cross and intersect to help each other out.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know we were talking during the commercial break. It's, if I would have known some of this stuff, it would be interesting to actually go and have my my kids' astrological charts, explained where you go, these are areas they're going to maybe have some issues with, and these are some areas that they're going to excel in. So now we're going to talk about the future and kind of planning, knowing what we know. So we've had our chart done and we're going to learn all sorts of things. Now, I understand that there are sections of our wheelhouse that actually apply to different times of our lives. Is that true?
Well, in a way, yes, and in a way, no. So, for example, if you take the wheel as the lifespan of the individual, the first house is birth and arrival on the planet. The second house is how do I stay dry and how do I get fed? The third house is mom, stop giving me carrots. I'd really rather have peas. Fourth house is wait a second, I'm around these people all the time. This is my tribe. This is my family. The fifth house is I really don't like some aspects of my family. I want to do what I want to do, but I can't do that until I get to the sixth house when I can go out and get a job. So the sixth house is like your first job where you're making some money and you're sort of getting some independence. The seventh house is when you find that employer that says, hey, we'd like to see you go to college and get this degree, or we want to elevate you to where you're going to have an actual salary job. We're going to help you succeed out in life. The eighth house is when you meet that other person and go, hey, you're attractive and I'd like to get to know you on a more intimate level. And maybe we'll actually team up and have a life together. The ninth house is I now know I need to be specialized in something to do more than just a manual labor job or a menial job. I've got to have some specialization. The 10th house is I'm now in a career. I'm making enough money to think about starting my own family. The 11th house is where do I belong? Where's the community I'm supposed to be part of? What do these people believe in that I'm with? And then the 12th house is your older life. It's like I'm trying to reflect on what I've done. So there's a way of seeing the houses as representing different segments of our lives. But depending on when we're born, our sun may appear in any one of those houses. Your sun might be in your third house. My sun is in my sixth house. That means that there's going to be a certain way we're going to try to evolve and develop over our lifetime based on that placement. Now, when we talk about where things are today, we can talk about trends in one's life, but there are also common patterns. You mentioned that one of your children was 28, which puts them at their Saturn return, which means when they were born, Saturn around 28 is coming back to its same location it was when it was born, which means there's a specific experience we're all supposed to have when Saturn returns to its original place in our chart, where we sort of step up to the next level of our development. So we can look at those trends by knowing where points are today and how they're applying to our individual charts.
Huh. Okay. Well, I think it would be interesting to, kind of figure that out. So I understand in Chinese zodiac folklore that they've got a superstition that they will not reveal their birthday information or their time, because people can look up a chart and prejudge you before you've even gotten out of diapers. Do you feel that there's relevance in that superstition on their behalf? I mean, if you walked in with somebody's birth chart, you could say, wow, you're going to have all sorts of problems. I'm not going to hire you. I mean, is there some truth to that? Or, I mean, obviously it's Chinese zodiac, so that's up to them to decide how they're going to do it. But I just thought it was very interesting. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, like any tool, it can be misused. A tool can be used valiantly, or it can be used in an inappropriate way. A hammer makes a great tool for nailing nails into a deck and building a deck. It also makes a fantastic weapon to hurt somebody with if you decide you want to use it that way. That's not how it's intended to be used, but it's a type of misuse. So if you were to use, for example, astrology as part of a hiring process, you would want to enter into using it as finding the best use of this individual's design within whatever your company does. So you wouldn't be trying to determine this person's not going to succeed, but you probably could look at someone's chart and say, wow, this person's design is great for research. Don't make them a public speaker. Don't put them in your marketing department and have to do public speaking. It's going to be really hard on them, and they're probably not going to do it particularly well. But that's not to say they couldn't be a fabulous researcher. And of course, you want to have a dialogue with that individual. Maybe the person that has a difficulty with public speaking would actually like to have the opportunity to try it out and learn it. So there might be a reason why you would say, well, okay, this is going to be something they need a lot of training in, but if they're willing to put the effort in, they could be good at it. So the chart is not deterministic, but it does give you a sense of where people's energy is going to be maybe more effective or less effective, but they can also work to build that up, or they can do a lot to not get the most benefit out of it. So the idea would be that you would want to, again, look at the chart, talk to the individual, because astrology doesn't cover everything. Free will is in many ways the fifth key. I say there are 5 keys to astrology. 4 of them are data: the sign, the house, the energy point or planet, and then aspects, the relationship between the points. Those are all data that you look at when you see that wheel that I produced for you. But the last one is free will. You can choose to love your chart, you can challenge your chart, whatever you want to do, but ultimately your chart also still has qualities that are what they are.
Okay, that makes complete sense. So we're getting close to winding this down, but what are the biggest takeaways that somebody could learn about their life path by getting a chart done by you?
Well, probably one of the biggest takeaways is validation about who they are, maybe even realization about some things that they wondered about themselves, and just a really thorough look at their identity and what they deal with in life and how they deal with in life. The other thing, of course, that astrology provides is just a lot of insight. It allows you to ask some very interesting questions and to see yourself in a very unique way, because really astrology is individualistic. People will say, well, can you tell me something about Taurus? And I would look at them and say, let's find out about you. Give me your information. Give me your birth date, your birth time, your birth location, and let's run your chart. Let's see all the complexity there, and let's talk about that, because that's going to be far more interesting than having to say a few things about you having a sun in whatever sign your sun happens to be in.
That makes complete sense. So we're getting down to the last minute or so. Philip, can you tell people again how they can reach out to you to get their chart done, and how to reach you?
Sure. So the easiest way to reach me is through my website. It is Black Unicorn, and unicorn is spelled UNYKORN.com. If you go to Facebook and you type in Black Unicorn, or you type in Black Unicorn in a Google search, because of the unusual spelling, you will get my information. So if you want to track me down, all you really have to do is type in Black Unicorn, and you can type the word astrology or tarot after that, and you will find a way to get to me. And the easiest way to get in touch with me is to fill out the form, because that will give me the information I need. And also, you can select times that work for you when you may want to get a reading done. You can also look at the different services. Maybe you want tarot, or you want a past life regression, or you want some numerology done. I do all of those services as well as astrology. So the best way to find out about my services and to line something up is to go through my website.
Okay, perfect. And I know you do an astrological forecast through Solely Holistic once a month.
Yes.
So look up Solely Holistic online as well and see how you can get in on that as well. So, but I want to say thank you, Philip, for joining me today. It's been absolutely interesting and very, very informative. And I just thank you again for joining me. And you've been listening to Message Delivery. You can't make this stuff up. I'm your host, Lisa Ann. And again, if you are interested in getting a reading through me, you can reach me at angelmessagestoyou.com. That's angelmessages2u.com. But I want to thank you all for joining me. And it's been great to talk with you. And we hope you have a great afternoon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.